Hello, everyone. Welcome to the lesson on Chapter 5, the Caribbean. This is our third region in the lesson stream for the semester, and probably one of the more, and I don't mean this in a negative way, it's probably one of the simpler regions in that it is smaller geographically and it is somewhat sort of stuck between Latin America, which is a lot more dominant in culture, and also North America. So I happen to be from the Caribbean myself originally. Uh, there's a lot of variability and diversity, but it's also, I think, a little bit more sort of self contained. Having said all that, let's get going on the Google sort of tour of the region first. So remember, it includes Guyana, Suriname, and French Guiana from South America. It also includes Belize in what we would call Central America or Latin America for your textbook. And then, of course, it includes Bermuda, it includes the Bahamas, Cuba, Jamaica, Haiti-Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, and then all these little smaller islands that make up the Lesser Antilles in the Caribbean. So, from the perspective of the environment, if you look at an island like, let's say, Puerto Rico, east-west mountains, or if you look like an island like the Dominican Republic and Haiti, also rather predominantly east-west islands. There's significant differences between the Haitian part and the Dominican Republic part. Of course, you have Cuba, and Cuba is a very mountainous region. It is a very large island with thousands of kilometers of coastline. Again, the mountains are generally east-west along the spine of it. You have Jamaica, of course, the Bahamas, which are primarily very, very low to the ground, not many mountains or much elevation change in the terrain. Of course, when you think about the Caribbean, there's really only one area that is, in terms of plate tectonics, that has a convergent plate, and that would be right here. And it leads to the deepest part of the Atlantic Ocean called the Puerto Rico Trench. So this is deeper here than Mount Everest is tall. Of course, once you get into the islands, now you're talking about whether it be the British Virgin Islands, the US Virgin Islands, and all the different places like St. Kitts and Nevis, Montserrat, Guadeloupe, Dominica, Martinique, St. Lucia, and so on. These are all big tourist places. And with few exceptions like Montserrat, which is volcanic in nature. In fact, if you zoom in, you can actually see the volcano. There it is. It's called Soufriere Hills. This volcano has erupted very, very recently. And you can see the flow of volcanic material down towards the coast in the form of ash. So this is a volcanically active island. Really about the only volcanically active region in the Caribbean. Once you get into Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, Haiti, Cuba, no volcanoes, although the region is tectonically active in terms of earthquakes. Okay. Again, if you keep looking, Aruba, Curacao, all these different islands here, they're essentially the top of a mountain chain. And you're talking about the idea of a convergent plate along with another plate. And so the end result is sort of these very distinctive peaks that we call basically islands. But if you take them beyond or below the sea level, you're talking about big giant mountains sticking out of the ocean floor. Okay. Again, this is very different than, say, the rest of the Caribbean. I'm sorry, the Atlantic, which is primarily ocean crust, which is diverging in the middle, where you see this sort of crack in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. It's very different in the Caribbean. The Caribbean is an area that is very subject to deforestation, so that's definitely a human influence, especially Haiti. The Caribbean is an area that is susceptible to tropical cyclones. Usually they will originate out here in the Eastern Atlantic, west of the African continent and Cape Verde, and they move east, west along the trade winds, and then they either affect this arc of island or Puerto Rico or really any of these places like Jamaica, Haiti, Dominican Republic, the Bahamas, Cuba, and eventually, possibly, the United States, Florida, the Gulf of Mexico, the East Coast. Ocean temperatures here can be anywhere in the high 20s to low 30s Celsius. That would be 80s to low 90s. So it's very, very warm water that is fuel for tropical cyclones. So this is a very seasonal threat in this region. We're talking about the months of June through November. That's hurricane season, with hurricane season peaking roughly around September 9 or 10. That is historically when the majority of tropical cyclones in the Atlantic Ocean and Caribbean will form. From a cultural standpoint, well, you have Spanish influence, British, French, and a combination of British and French and African and all kinds of other sort of flavors from the world. It is a very diverse region. Although the slave trade brought many Africans into the region, remember that the majority of Africans went into what we call present-day Brazil. So the majority of it, like close to 90% of it, went into Brazil. The rest of it went into the Caribbean, Central America, Mexico, the United States. But the grand majority of it went into Brazil. Still, that influence is felt. If you are Puerto Rican or Dominican or Cuban, you know this. Any of those individuals or individuals from those islands can either be very white, that would be the Spanish background. They can be very dark, that could be the African background, or they can be somewhere in the middle. They could have more of a native. So, for example, in Puerto Rico, the native population referred to as Taínos. And so you can have a combination of that, Spanish, Black, somewhere in there. So it's a very mixed, which is why Hispanic isn't just one type of individual. You can have many variants of it. And so that's what makes the region interesting. There's clearly Spanish dominance in this region, but you can't really get away from French. So Port-au-Prince, this along with New Orleans, so Port-au-Prince and New Orleans, those were the two entry points into the New World for the French. Of course, Puerto Rico had, of course, San Juan, Havana, and in Dominican Republic, you have Santo Domingo, which is the big capital. So that you have that capital here. In Puerto Rico, you have, of course, San Juan. In Cuba, of course, you have the capital, Havana. So, you know, those are the places, those are the port cities that were established by the Spanish as a point of entry into the rest of the island. You have to think back to when there were no trains, no vehicles. It was mainly horses and ships. That's really it. So, of course, in present-day Caribbean, or Caribbean, however you like to say it, tourism is a big, big, big deal in this area of the world. So whether it be cruises that take off out of New York, or Miami, or Charleston, New Orleans, Houston, this whole region is traversed daily, especially during the winter season, which is their dry season, with cruise liners. you know, think about all those, the Disney cruises and Carnival and Norwegian and whatever the other kinds are. So it's a very, very popular area for tourism, namely because during the nice, warm, dry winter, that's usually when it's really cold and snowy up in the Northeast and New York and the upstates or the northern regions of the United States and Canada. So therefore, a lot of people like to escape down to this area. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful region of the world. Definitely worth visiting. So anyway, so that's the Google Earth tour. Let's now look at the presentation itself. All right, so this is like an image that you would have of the Caribbean, right? Beautiful beaches, palm trees. The weather is always nice. That's sort of the prototypical image. Warm all the time. There's really no winter. It doesn't get cold really at any point. It's beautiful, tropical beauty. Okay, and it's what makes the area very attractive. So these are the objectives for the lesson. There are significant European and colonial ties to the area. To this day, it is impossible to get away from it. In fact, if the United States itself has done any colonialism, you could think of it as Puerto Rico. I don't particularly call it a bad thing in that sense, being from Puerto Rico originally. Without U.S. influence in that island would be in really bad shape, worse shape than they're even off right now. So, there's good with bad, of course. Some of the concepts, and again, the boundaries, already addressed it. The fact that it's 26 countries and independent territories. And the area is referred to as having isolated proximity. It's close to Latin America, it's close to North America, yet as a function of socioeconomic issues, it's not exactly close either. So there's this sort of isolated proximity as the book addresses it. Again, this dashed line is the tectonic plate. So as a result, there was a very strong earthquake that happened in Port-au-Prince or in Haiti in 2010. This region is tectonically active and slightly volcanically active. And this is the breakdown of the smaller islands, all the way from Trinidad and Tobago, which is almost immediately just outside the Venezuelan coast, and all the different what are called windward and leeward islands, which constitute the Lesser Antilles. So this whole arc is referred to as the Lesser Antilles. The islands way on the south are called the Windward Islands, and the islands on the north end of the arc are called the Leeward Islands. Okay, of course, let's not forget Suriname, French Guiana, and Guyana itself. So this is the French influence in addition to Haiti in this part of the world. All right. So these are some of the environmental issues here. Of course, deforestation is a big deal. Deforestation is a big deal in Haiti especially, and I'll show you some images. Deforestation is an issue in the South American countries, and because of high population numbers, there's always stress on the environment. Climate change has an impact here as a function of perhaps more significant or stronger storms, like what happened in 2017. And unfortunately, this area is always sort of in the crosshairs of tropical cyclone activity just by virtue of where it is. But deforestation is an issue, soil erosion, which is tied to deforestation, and forest and coastal management challenges are also a part of daily environmental sort of concerns here. Again, here's what Cuba looks like. It's the biggest piece of real estate in the entire area. And as Cuba becomes a bigger and bigger part of the connected, globalized world, you have to wonder how will its otherwise pristine ecosystems along the coast will manage. Will they do it smartly? And that's still an ongoing problem. One of the benefits of Cuba being so isolated from the world economy for as long as they were is that a lot of their coastal regions were pristine, beautiful, almost untouched, therefore undamaged. As they become a bigger and bigger part of the global economy, maybe hotels begin to open up and all that, how is that going to be affected? Again, I mentioned deforestation. So deforestation in Haiti is a big deal. This is the Haitian-Dominican Republic border. And in this very, very dramatic image, you can see how each country, Dominican Republic here, Haiti here, that's the border, how each of the places manages it differently. You can see there's less erosion possible here, more erosion possible here, because there's nothing to hold back the water. And remember, this is a tropical region. So when it rains really, really hard. Again, infrastructure was an issue in 2010 when Haiti was affected by a 6-point-something Richter scale earthquake. As you can see, a lot of this infrastructure is sort of hodgepodge and sort of thrown together without little regard for code. And as a result, it is very easily damaged when the ground shakes. Okay, we'll talk about the idea of the island and the mainland. There are ties. In the United States, for example, the tie is primarily with Puerto Rico. But there are connections between any of those other countries or island countries and other parts of the world, whether that be migration, whether that be economic, political, any of those connections will link these islands to the mainland. Climate. For the most part, each location has a significant dry season. By and large, that dry season happens to be during the Northern Hemisphere winter. And that is why these typical A climate, AW, AW, AF, that's why these climates are very conducive for the execution of tourism, and why tourism is a big deal in this part of the world, the big moneymaker. And as you can see, Havana, Port-au-Prince, San Juan, Barbados, and Belize all have dry seasons during February, March, April. Others further south have their drier seasons during the opposite season. So that's a little bit too far south as a result. But in the end, they all have a significant drier period, even if during that dry period it still rains. So the northern part of Puerto Rico and Dominican Republic have trade winds that are constantly bringing in moisture. And as a result, you tend to have this very wet climate all the way down through the Windward and Leeward Islands. The Caribbean Sea, it is extremely vulnerable to sea level rise and increased storm intensity. And the 2017 season is a very, very good and very, very stark example of that. We'll talk about the idea of, whether it be tropical rainforest or tropical savannas, or what are called mangroves, and the significance of those in the Caribbean. So this is, with the exception of the South American portion of the region, the entirety of the Caribbean is vulnerable to tropical storms. And this is every single tropical storm track ever recorded since records began, obviously. And as you can see, you can't barely see the Caribbean. But if you look at the northern part of South America, no storms affected. So those three countries, Suriname, French Guiana, and Guyana, are free from this threat. It's the only area that is. Here's Hurricane Maria in 2017. It was a Category 4 when it hit Puerto Rico, a very strong Category 4. And it literally crisscrossed the island on a diagonal, and it did tremendous damage. It hit the island, again, at the worst possible angle. Puerto Rico had really not been affected by a strong hurricane since the 1930s. I mean, it had been affected by storms, but nothing so severe. Unlike the U.S. main island, unlike the U.S. mainland, if you're in Puerto Rico, there's no place to go unless you fly out. So you pretty much have to ride the storm out in place. So it's difficult to respond to. In 2017, Maria and Irma, we're talking about 2 Category 5 hurricanes back to back and 3 in one season. That's remarkable. I mean, at one point in time, the entire island of Dominica was empty. Everybody evacuated. It was a complete wipeout of the place. And what you have is, typically the waters warm up above this black line, which is the magical number for hurricanes to draw energy from. And in 2017, that water was that much warmer. So that is a lot of energy that became available for these storms to tap into. And this is Puerto Rico. Again, lost power for literally almost an entire year in some areas. I have an uncle who lives near the capital, and he had no power for over 200 days. Now, sometimes it would come back briefly, but it was basically gone for a very, very long time. And so that gives you a sense of, imagine not, take away your Wi-Fi for about an hour and you will be like pulling your hair. Imagine no power and no Wi-Fi and basically no internet for the better part of 200 days. And, get back to me. See how happy that would make you, right? So it was really a big deal. This is the islands, the effect on vegetation for this hurricane. Notice how green it looks before and literally how brown it looks after. It's literally like a mower came and just took away all the vegetation. So these are significant events, even in places that are used to experiencing them. Again, population. Population is always important. This area is clearly plummeting in terms of fertility. And that is the one big blanket statement you can make. Fertility is plummeting region-wide. In fact, Puerto Rico actually experienced a population drop. So overall, the higher densities are found in the Greater Antilles and in the Rimland states, which would be that and that. It is very sparsely populated. And these are the fertility rates with very few exceptions. I mean, there's a few countries that are above 3, but by and large, everybody's below 2 or very close to it. So this is a significant change in fertility across one generation. Here's Puerto Rico as of 2020, stage 5 country, fertility rate of 1.2 Again, just as a reminder, total fertility rate is the number of children born to a woman during her reproductive years. You need at least 2.1 in order to maintain your population the way it is. Puerto Rico is clearly shrinking. Each successive year group is smaller than the one before. Here's the stage pyramid or the population pyramid for Jamaica. They are at replacement level 2.1, stage 4, meaning stable. Barbados, shrinking, not as fast as Puerto Rico, but shrinking nonetheless, stage 5. And then stage 3, Dominican Republic is already ended its growth spurt and is now slowing down significantly. The one I really wanted to show you is Haiti. And the fertility rate was 5.5 in 95, 4 in 2005, 2.7 in 2018, and 2.5 in 2020. That is a remarkable drop in fertility. The fastest rate of decrease in the entire region, by far. So in the span of less than a generation, they have literally gone from a country that was essentially exploding in terms of population to one that is slowed down significantly. Migration. So we're talking about the idea of emigration and then transnationalism, which means you move within regions, okay, or within a region. So transnationalism would be from island to island, whereas the other might be from Puerto Rico to the US, from Puerto Rico to Europe, from Puerto Rico to other places. So emigration versus transnationalism, which means movement within a country. The settlement, the plantation legacy, coffee, sugar, pineapples, the impact of slavery. This still lingers in terms of the settlement patterns within this region, especially at the rural level. When you look at cities like Old San Juan or Havana or Santo Domingo, these were entry points into these larger islands. This is called El Morro, which is a big Spanish fort, which was built in the, I don't know, what was it, the 1400s, late 1400s. Still there, still there. It's remarkably well constructed. It was basically a defensible point that allowed Spanish galleons and other ships to be able to come into what at the time was a strictly Spanish dominated location. So there's Old San Juan, that is that port. So this right here is this. And I remember as a kid, I used to fly kites right in this little green spot. And this is still remarkably well maintained. Again, it sticks out into the ocean. This is Old San Juan. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful, beautiful city. Despite it being so terribly damaged by Hurricane Maria in 2017. Here is Old San Juan, and here is contemporary or modern day San Juan. Let's see, let's look at the idea of cultural diversity. There is South Asian influence in Trinidad and in South. So it's one of those interesting areas where Hindus have migrated to. You know, Indians are often seen in places like the United Kingdom, in places like parts of Canada and parts of the US, but you also find them in Trinidad and Tobago. They have brought with them their culture, their dress, their food, their religion, and their linguistic diversity into the area. Again, the imprint of colonialism still lingers in whether it's plantation leftovers, monocrop, which is the idea of planting one specific type of crop. Coffee is a big deal, obviously from the Caribbean. Sugar. Here's the idea of the transatlantic slave trade. We mentioned this already. Although the majority of it went into Brazil, you cannot deny the fact that the French, Caribbean, Danish, British, Spanish all had sort of flows of slaves from what would be basically Central and Equatorial Africa, Sierra Leone, Gold Coast, Benin, what is present-day Angola, into what's now the Caribbean, South America, and the south and east of the United States. Again, some of the African religions still linger and remain. So we're talking about the idea of Gullah, Santeria, other such religions remain. Those African populations brought them with them during the slave trade, and they have become sort of entrenched in the lore and local culture of places like Brazil, Cuba, Haiti, Puerto Rico, Jamaica, and even the southeast US. Charleston, Savannah, Beaufort, South Carolina, sort of like the epicenter of what we would call voodoo in the United States. The same goes for southern Louisiana. So that is sort of one of those cultural diffusion methods that have been sort of put into play as a function of the slave trade into the Western world. The idea of Creolization is the blending of African, European, and what are called Amerindian cultural elements. So that would be language, that would be food, that would be clothing styles and habits. Again, in Puerto Rico, you have Tainos, just like you have similar populations in the Dominican Republic, Haiti, Jamaica, Cuba, and so on. So while the majority of the population is, say, Spanish speaking, there might be local elements that speak a very localized tribal language that is only spoken, that may not even have a writing component to it. Of course, Caribbean identity and cultural diversity. You talk about the idea of baseball. Baseball is probably far more popular in the Caribbean and Latin America than it is in the US, quite frankly. Think about the big stars in Major League Baseball nowadays. By and large, they are Hispanic in origin. Not all of them, obviously, but a significant number of them. The sugar cane trade, we're talking about the idea of Bacardi and rum. So basically Bacardi in Cuba, primarily Havana, that is where its headquarters were set, but you can find Bacardi factories in Puerto Rico. So from Spain to Cuba to Puerto Rico and the US, and the globalization of rum. And rum is a very popular liquor. It is popular for cooking. It is popular for cocktail making. It has left that niche of being something that's drank locally, and it's become a global commodity. So it all basically has its roots in what we would call Cuba, Havana, the very famous sort of like bat that is sort of the brand name or the brand identity of Bacardi rum. There are many other rums that are made, but Bacardi just happens to be the more famous one. Again, this gives you a sense of all the colonial influences throughout the Caribbean, specifically the Windward and Leeward Islands. So we're talking about British, French, Let's see what else. Dutch, all kinds of influences that you find in this region. And while they may be independent states now, that influence is found either in the language they speak, the architecture, and a lot of the customs that are found there. Let's see here. All right, so I want to get to the tourism part. So tourism is probably the biggest component of it. So tourism is a big deal in the Caribbean. So these big cruise liners we talked about, whether it is the Bahamas or whether it is San Juan or Havana or any other place, it's a big deal because it brings in millions of dollars in revenue and jobs. And when people leave these ships for their sort of daily excursions, they have stuff they can buy, and it's a big deal for the local economy. And of course, people stay at hotels sometimes. And so all that money is kind of a big deal. A lot of American and North American brands. So think about higher end hotels like Four Seasons and the higher end Marriott and Hilton all have hotels with golf courses and beautifully manicured campuses that people like to go to and escape during what we call winter. So it's a big deal. It's a big deal to the area, and its influence can't really be denied. In this era of COVID, as of right now, it's still a big deal. It may have lessened this to some extent, but there will come a rebound at some point, whenever that is, 2021, 2022, 2023, whenever that happens to be. And that rebound will mean a sort of bumper crop for the tourism industry because people will want to get out. People will want to go back on cruises. People will want to go back and travel by air. So that becomes a big deal. So that's what I have for you. I hope you enjoy the lesson. Again, it's a very interesting region. I hope you get a chance to visit it if you haven't. So otherwise, have a great week and we'll talk to you soon.